By the I don't remember the exact date, but I want to say 1928 was the peak, they believe, in terms of the number of houses that were there, about 90.
Some of the residents here turned to some vigilante justice. They had shotguns.
The influence populations had and caused sort of the demise of this town is what we did to the water levels.
My understanding was it was a bit of a lawless place, and I think probably the isolated nature of the place probably allowed a lot of that kind of activity to flourish.
"10 years from now, there's going to be nothing left. People are going to walk through here and they're going to never know that there was a town to begin with."
My name is Seal Craig, it's short for Cecilia, and I'm president of the San Francisco Bay National Wildlife Society, but my predominant part of Drawbridge is as a volunteer for the Fish and Wildlife Service.
Doug Cordell, Public Affairs Officer for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service at the San Francisco Bay National Wildlife Refuge Complex.
I mean, you can see what's left. There's not anything left. Let's rough it right through here. Let's head over to the railroad. This is the railroad that was conceived by Slippery Jim Fair and Hog Davis. It's really because of their idea that this whole town existed in the first place. They were the ones who came up with an idea to make a railroad somewhere between Fremont and Mountain View.
Well, it was formed in the late 1880s when Slippery Jim Fair and Hog Davis, when they put it together, they decided they wanted this railroad that would compete with stagecoach. Okay.
Well, my understanding is that about 1876 or so was when the bridge operator, the drawbridge operator, moved down there.
It was the late 1800s that Mr. Wunderschietz, I'm sure I'm butchering his name. Anyway, that is when he was tasked to be the drawbridge operator. He was the only resident. But people found a lot of value in this land. It was great hunting. There was a lot of duck hunting, which led to a lot of gun clubs. People would come from San Francisco and come from all around, and there'd be these gun clubs where they could, hang out, talk hunting, and go fishing and catch tons of ducks.
And then rapidly thereafter, within a few years, there started being gun clubs that they would go there so they could do duck hunting in the winter. This is very prolific ducks here during winter migration.
And over the next 10, 20 years was when a larger number of people came down and built a community, so that by the early 20th century there were close to about 90 structures down there.
By the I don't remember the exact date, but I want to say 1928 was the peak, they believe, in terms of the number of houses that were there, about 90.
Drawbridge had no roads, no streets. This was how you got from the main street, the railroad, to someone's house, these little planks.
There was no streets or anything like that. The railroad track was their main street, and then they had boardwalks going out to some, and some houses would be a couple of, let's say, how would you say, almost half a block, not really a good name for this, but a little half off the main street, the road, the railroad.
It is not the easiest thing in the world to walk through this terrain. I know on camera it probably looks really nice and lush, but it's actually knee-high and kind of a nightmare to walk through. I came here as recently as about 6 weeks ago, and this wasn't this low to the ground. This was a bit higher. So every day, high tide and low tide happens, which brings in a rush of water, and then the water comes back out. And just like when you're standing on the beach, when you go to the beach and the water comes in, it comes back out, you find that your feet kind of sink in the sand a little bit. It's the exact same thing with these houses. And every year we're losing more and more houses like this. They're literally sinking into the marsh. I'm not sure whose house this used to be. You can look at a map and see who owned which house. Charlie Luce had a house. Nellie Dolan had a house.
Charlie is the last one. He left in 1976. He worked for PG&E, lineman, worked for them for a long time, and he lived in Drawbridge. I wouldn't call him a character, but there were these Charlieisms they would refer to that talked about it. And prior to that, Nellie Dolan, but she also lived there very long. She was born in 1900, moved there in 1910, if I remember, and was there till the late 60s, and then moved out. She had, I think what I remember reading is 3 husbands, a couple of kids, and she worked for a living, it sounded like most of her life. She worked in San Francisco, she worked in San Jose, she would take the train up there, and she's one of the ones we have pictures of that show her in slacks and hunting. She loved to hunt and fish, and she had clearly 3 husbands in those times. I mean, that's a fairly independent woman.
I mean, this is such a weird feeling of both cozy and creepy at the same time, because it's a cozy little cabin. There's little shelves and these great windows and a little patio out here, and it's really creepy because people have come and put up a lot of really terrible graffiti, really bad graffiti. Now, the craziest thing to me about this whole situation is Mountain View is right there. It's right there. Fremont is right there. San Francisco is right over there. Silicon Valley is a bustling place where real estate doesn't often go untended. And you can even see they're building the new 49ers stadium over there. To have all of that commotion, all of that real estate, and just in the middle of it all, have a town that's literally sinking into the middle of the ground seems like such a strange situation to me. An unbelievable situation that somebody would sort of forget about this place or just make a conscious decision to leave this place alone. Literally let it get soaked up by the bay. Word got out that there was a town with some vacancies, and what they called dopers, or what we know as, vagrants, drug addicts, started coming here, and they would use these empty houses as places to squat, drug dens, essentially, which is a problem, There's no police department. There's nobody to come and, save these properties. It was a major problem.
Now, in the 60s, what did start to happen was they started to use, from what I've read, people would go in and use it for drugs, some of these abandoned buildings. But that had nothing to do with the people living there. That was people who then took advantage of the fact that the place was starting to go downhill. And in fact, there were people still living there when this was happening.
Some of the residents here turned to some vigilante justice. They had shotguns. I know Charlie Luce and Nellie Dolan had shotguns. It's a prominent hunting town. There's no reason why they wouldn't have shotguns. And they would defend their property. If people came knocking and barging into their house, which did happen at times, they would fight back with gunfire. But pretty soon the problem became just far too rampant. And the vagrants were doing things like burning down homes and really frightening the permanent residents here. So one by one, people started to leave, and people would hear about Drawbridge as being a ghost town, and it kind of became a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more that stigma was pushed, the more it actually became a reality until it became a ghost town. The San Francisco Wildlife Society and the government that owns this property, they have agreed to neither restore the land nor demolish it. They're literally letting it be reclaimed by the bay. Every day the water comes in, the water comes back out. These houses sink a little bit more into the bay. And what we're witnessing is really the death rattle. It's the final grasp of life to what once was a thriving town.
The buildings are there now, and they are crumbling. They're, you know, the wood is deteriorating. The actual structures are slowly sinking into the marsh there. And we will allow that to happen over however long that takes. The idea is that that land is set aside as a National Wildlife Refuge to be marshland, and that's what it will be when those buildings finally disappear into the marsh.
So I think, you know, just seeing all this stuff, I wish in some ways it was stopped, arrested decay, but we're just letting it go.
You know, I don't know what the legal penalty is. I could have to check that out. I just know, I mean, basically the rap was on discouraging public access. I can tell you about that. I don't know what the penalty is exactly. I would have to check that out. But in terms of that area is closed to the public. And the reason for that is basically safety reasons. It is a difficult location to get into and get out of, in addition to which there is an active freight rail line that runs through that area and can be quite dangerous, particularly if the wind is blowing in the opposite direction and people who are out there on some sort of adventurous hunt may not hear a very fast freight train coming in the opposite direction. So it's not a place that we recommend people try to get out there, and it is closed to the public.
I've heard there's a couple of problems. I mean, if you trespass out there, you get a fine. I've heard it's a fairly hefty fine, 1,000 plus. I don't know what the fine is, to be honest. And I think the other thing too is it's dangerous. If you go across the railroad tracks, certainly you can see at fairly good distance when a train is coming. But I've been out there because I take people out in a van tour out there, and you could bicycle out there to the edges of it on the south side, not the north. And the trains come pretty fast. And you could all of a sudden be walking across a bridge, you get your foot caught or something, and there is no walkway. I mean, it's very dangerous. You could really hurt yourself. Be diving into the water, who knows how shallow it is or deep it is, depending on the tide. There's nobody out there to get you. I mean, just from a physical danger, it's there.
10 years from now, there's going to be nothing left. People are going to walk through here and they're going to never know that there was a town to begin with. You know, people built their lives here. Someone paid to have someone build this doorway. Someone bought this bed and slept here. Someone cooked food in that sink. Someone used to sit on that front porch and drink their coffee in the morning. Someone knew all of their neighbors all the way up and down, and people really made a life here. And this is what's left of it.